I'm James Santilli, and my city is Sydney, Australia. Thank you, Rich. I'm a user experience designer at Learnosity. The design team are the biggest advocate for our customers. Well, actually, our customers' users as well. We're passionate about usability and accessibility.
Hi, my name is Kevin Holloway. We're figuring this out. My name is Kevin Holloway. I'm a business development engineer here at Learnosity, and what that means is that I'm the one that helps support all your technical and coding needs. In fact, I've probably worked somehow with a fair number of you in the room, and hopefully a lot more. So, what are we going to talk about when we talk about accessibility? Well, first of all, we're going to talk about the challenges of developing an accessible product. And that's both from Learnosity's point of view, that's from yours, the client's point of view, that's from a user point of view. We're going to talk about the advantages of that accessible focus, including the market that's out there to capture, the requirements that you may need to meet, like WCAG and 508 of the ADA. And then finally, we're going to look at what Learnosity has done as far as solutions go. We're going to look at some examples of some design that we've done. We're going to do some demos to see it live, what it's like, both from the student point of view and the authoring point of view. And we've got a kind of a packed deck here. We're not going to have time for a Q&A at the end of our slides, but please come up to us and ask us any questions you might have about accessibility. Oh, and don't forget about the question cards. It's a good time to bring it up, that we've added to all your seats. We definitely want them for the Q&A at the end. But again, come up and talk to us. Now, accessibility is a complicated topic. James and I might not know every answer, but we definitely know the right person in the room to find. So we're going to start with the challenges. So the challenges, it might be a little harder and more varied than you think. It isn't simply good UI design. It's a huge amount of challenges to face, and each of those requires a different solution. And it's definitely worth getting on the same page for each of those challenges. So truthfully, when I've talked with past clients about implementing accessibility, there's sort of this sense of uncertainty that looms over the conversation. And there's a good reason for that. Oh, did we just lose? There we go. Seeing that? All right. Accessibility can just be a challenging topic to discuss, let alone implement. And I found this less in education, but in many industries, accessibility is just one of those last efforts, the thing tacked on at the end rather than considered in the front. And there are a couple reasons I think this is. I think there is a lack of awareness. Like, let solutions slow down. There's a non-stop development and a non-stop testing effort that goes along with accessibility. That means once you're done building your tools and your product's finished, it's never really done. You have to continue to go back and look at the tool, test these accessible tools that you've built, make sure they're working, and constantly continue to improve upon them. Frankly, the stakes are very high. It's not the difference between a good and bad user experience that we're talking about. It's the difference between a user being able to use your platform at all. And obviously, that makes the stakes very high. So when Learnosity talks about the type of disabilities that we test for, we think of these four: visual, auditory, motor, and cognitive. All four of these add up a large range of considerations that each require multiple unique solutions. And as I said, each of these is a development effort on its own. We do want to recognize, though, that there are obviously many other types of disabilities. And if there are any that are relevant to your platform, if it's something you want us to start looking into, you want to talk about, a great reason to come up to us and talk to us after the talk. So James is going to take over and talk us through each of the disabilities, what we look for, and how we test with them.
Visual disability. In the United States, visual disability affects 3% of the population. Conditions may include color blindness, blurry or weak vision, or no vision at all. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. That's better? Visual disability. Conditions may include color blindness, blurry or weak vision, or no vision at all. This disability impacts how a student sees and perceives information in your product, things like content and questions or components in the interface. At Learnosity, the interface of our APIs has been designed to be high in contrast. We've also designed for scenarios where the interface can't be seen at all. We'll be using a screen reader to read the interface later in the demo section. Auditory disability. This also affects 3% of the population in the United States. Conditions may include low hearing impairment to severe hearing impairment, or no hearing impairment at all. This disability affects how a student hears information in your product. Things like notification sounds, audio tracks, for example. Provided your students can see, an auditory disability will not impact the student's experience with the Learnosity APIs. It's important to note, however, that this relies on you to author the content in an accessible way. We'll give some tips on how to do that later in the talk. Motor disability affects 8% of the population in the United States. Conditions may include chronic fatigue, congenital diseases, minor injuries, or more traumatic ones. This disability impacts a student's physical tasks, the dexterity of their hands or their body motion, for example. Motor disabilities require the use of assistive technology in order to interact with your product. Things like adaptive keyboards, switches, and touchpads. At Learnosity, Assess API and Questions API have been developed with clear paths for keyboard navigation. We'll be using keyboard navigation later in the demo section. Cognitive disabilities are quite broad. At Learnosity, we consider functional cognitive disabilities the first priority of web accessibility. These are conditions such as memory recall difficulty, distractibility, and comprehension difficulties. This disability impacts a student's mental tasks, their ability to recall, focus, and organize information, for example. Cognitive disabilities require certain accommodations to be made. At Learnosity, our APIs include visual clues to highlight important information for students. We use structural elements to make it easy for students to understand the content and identify it again. And we've also made it possible for you to create supplemental media for students with comprehension difficulties. We'll touch on how to do that later in the talk. At Learnosity, we test with screen reader software. Screen reader software gives us the necessary coverage of the 3 types of disabilities that we mentioned before. Screen reader technology in particular can be quite specialized, and it's the reason why it's in the challenges section of our talk. The learning curve for using a screen reader can be intimidating. At Learnosity, we've supported employees who've developed an interest in screen readers, and in doing so, we found these employees became evangelists for the technology. Those employees have helped the adoption within the teams. When you raise an issue about screen readers, more than one of us will be able to triage the issue for you. If at this point some of you are thinking, what is a screen reader? It's a program that runs on the student's computer. It's not a program in Learnosity's APIs, and it's not in your product. It's something that the student installs on their computer. The screen reader assists the student by describing the contents of the page. Yes. Yeah. Different screen readers are optimized for different browsers. Trying to support all the screen readers on the market is just not feasible. Your testing efforts can quickly multiply across all the types of screen readers and across all the types of browsers. At Learnosity, we test with 4 screen readers. Chromevox for Google Chrome, and that's cross-platform. VoiceOver for Safari on Mac OS X. NVDA for Firefox on Windows, and JAWS for Internet Explorer on Windows. We'll be using Chromevox in a live demo later in this talk.
So accessibility does bring its challenges, the multiple different tools for each of those disabilities we talked about, the high stakes, But one thing we thought was worth pointing out is that it's always been a part of Learnosity's goals. Take a look at these two images on the screen. The one on the left was built by Mark and Gav pre-Learnosity, before Learnosity was even a word. In Flash. Oh, wait, yeah. Oh, that's horrible. And on the right, we have the current set of accessibility options that's available to your students today. Now, you'll notice there's been a couple UI updates here and there, but I hope you see that a lot of the basic tools that we have today started way back when. They've always been part of what Learnosity wants to achieve. Because despite the challenges that we've mentioned, we believed that the effort of meeting them is very rewarding. So why do we put our collective efforts into accessibility? What exactly are the advantages? The first is allowing your platform to capture more of the market. Now, estimates here do vary. It's hard to say for sure, but generally it's found that about 1 in 5 people using the internet require some kind of combination. So James went through the number for each individual, but you could see the breakdown of the 20% here. So each of these, as we've mentioned, required a different solution. But the great news is that by utilizing Learnosity, our accessible tools, you can capture all of it. So requirements, it's often a big question. So the two requirements that we think is worth talking about most, it's the two requirements we test against the most, are the Section 508 of the ADA and WCAG. So the ADA, for those that don't know, it's the American with Disabilities Act. It was updated in 1998 with guidelines for electronic and information technology, and eventually, obviously, lots of details for the web. It was actually just updated. So this section, the new section 508, all the requirements for federal accessibility were there, including what devices should be supported, what information should be available to screen reader software and other accessible software, closed captioning requirements, visual requirements, just to name a few. It's a federal law, so obviously there are tons of details. The other one we often test ourselves against and look at constantly is WCAG, created by the World Wide Web Consortium. It stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and is one of the most used standards around the world. So what we use these two standards, that were sort of the rule set that we test ourselves against when we look at accessibility. And Learnosity is extensively compliant to AA WCAG and the standards of Section 508. But unfortunately, due to the difficulty of representing some of the more complex question types, it's never perfectly compliant, but we're always going to make each of our questions accessible as much as we possibly can. And this has to do with sort of technical limitations. The experience between a very visual question type with, let's say, a screen reader versus not, it's always going to be a little different, but we'll always strive to make it as best as possible. That being said, if these requirements are important to you and you author with that in mind, you can easily meet the requirements of both AA WCAG and Section 508. So what are some other ways we evolve besides testing ourselves against these requirements? So some other ways we evolved are, one, client feedback, what we hear from you guys. What we hear from your users, you are the people that actually put Learnosity in the hands of users, and you're the people we want to hear from most when it comes to how are people with impairments utilizing Learnosity. And going even further, we test with our own users too. We check to make sure our tools work. But that being said, it's important to note, and Gav and Mark touched on this a bit when they did their intro speech, but it's important to note that the reason Learnosity makes accessibility a priority is not to check a box. I truly believe what draws us to education, whether it's directly like teaching or just working in the industry like all of us in this room today, is an interest in doing good. I think there are plenty of other industries we could find ourselves in. It would be easy to switch over. But I think what draws us together to this industry is to make something great, and that'll help people, right? So though I want to impress upon you the business reasons to make accessibility a priority, though I want to show you the requirements that you can hit with Learnosity, I suspect the greatest and probably most obvious reason to everyone in the room is that it's going to help the students that need it most. Our primary reason for making accessibility a priority is simply that we feel it's the right thing to do. I suspect that our missions sort of align. We both want to create something great. We want to be able to assess students on their abilities and not their disabilities. And that's why it was a priority from the beginning. It was Gav and Mark built these tools from the very beginning because they felt it would help those who needed it most. So now that we've talked about the challenges and we've talked about the reasons to face those challenges, let's probably talk about what you're most interested in, which is the solutions that Learnosity has developed and continue to work on today. James is going to start by talking us through a lot of the design solutions.
The first accessible solution we have is text color. Text color is important for persons with visual and cognitive disability. In Assess API, we have multiple color theme options available with accessible colors in them. Text color in each theme passes a minimum color contrast ratio of 3:1 as required in the WCAG. In an assessment, these colors can be selected by the student so they can choose the option that suits them best. In real-world testing environments, where you may be required to provide students with comprehension difficulties an assessment that's delivered on a different coloured piece of paper, our accessible colour themes are essentially the digital equivalent of your coloured paper. Text size for visual and cognitive disability. Now, most modern web browsers can scale text. Those of us in the room would probably be familiar with Command+, Command-, or Control+, Control- in our web browsers. However, some user segments are not necessarily aware of this feature. Some browsers on tablet and mobile devices don't even provide access to this feature at all. So at Learnosity, we bring this feature forward in our accessibility options. UI component contrast for visual disability. On the screen, we have a closed text question. On the left is how a closed text question looks under normal conditions. And on the right, we've simulated what this question may look like in a low light environment. You'll see the components and the text remain legible in the low light environment simulation. Questions are presented to students in different environments. On the monitors of various shapes and sizes, different color profiles, low light display panels of government issued tablet devices, or in front of a class presented on a wall with a projector. Questions may appear saturated or blurry. The high contrast of Learnosity's UI components will help all students, not just those with visual disability, to see and perceive information in these environments. UI component color for visual disability. Accessible colors are also present in Questions API too. This is a simple chart question in histogram mode. Each colored bar has an accessible color, and that color is high in contrast. Together, the colors are quite pleasing, and students of all abilities will be able to see them. This question hasn't always looked this way, though. In 2015, we realized some students were looking at this version of the question, and they were seeing this, and they were seeing this. This is a simulation of what persons with color blindness, protanopia or deuteranopia, were seeing. If we were going to ensure that this information was conveyed accurately to people of all abilities, we had to redesign our color palette. We explored different color combinations and mocked up new chart designs. We used online color resources and defined 10 new accessible colors. We also went down to the level of detail of adjusting the order in which these colors are positioned to create maximum color contrast between each bar color. With Learnosity's accessible solutions, you get these colors in this order by default.
So ARIA attributes. So ARIA attributes make everything on the page more accessible for those students with screen readers. It basically makes all of the complicated HTML very easy for screen readers to interpret. So basically, we tackle ARIA labels and other labels that screen readers read in three different ways. One, the ARIA states are built into the parts that are important automatically, whether that's the question or the assess wrapper. The screen reader is going to have an easy time reading it. Two, when you author something, it's automatically generated for your content. And let's say, for example, math, in some complicated situations, you can even edit the things that we've generated. We'll show that soon. And finally, the live regions, when a student is working on their own assessment, those are updated live. So when they listen to their answers and hear them back, they can hear exactly what they've typed. So we are moving on to our very first demo. For this first one, we're going to take a look at what it's like to use a screen reader with Learnosity ARIA labels. This is from a student perspective, not from the authoring perspective. It is at this time I have to unfortunately introduce our third presenter, Chromevox. It likes to interrupt. It likes to say things over me. It will constantly, trying to explain something as it's talking can be a little challenging. We'll see how it goes. It'll be good.
Are we tabbing out?
Yeah. Tabbing over. Oh, sorry. Let's take a look. Oh, this will be challenging. Oh, hold on. Sorry.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, James. Okay, so let's pretend that I am an 8th grade teacher and James is my student. He's going to be using our screen reader to get through our geography questions here. So I might say, James being, a visually impaired, needs a screen reader, and I'm going to say, class, why don't you take the first question on geography? So he will punch in and start up Chromevox, and hopefully we hear something.
Which of these cities are state capitals?
There we go. And now James can go down and listen to the question as we just heard.
Which of these cities are state capitals?
And then go down piece by piece and understand each part of the question.
List with 4 items. List item. Wilmington, North Carolina. Check box not checked. List item. Trenton, New Jersey. Check box not.
So I hope you're noticing that not only as he goes down are we getting the context of the text, but actually what it is on the web page. It's not just reading text. It's going down and saying it hasn't checked, giving the student his status. Keep going.
Sorry, can you hear that down the other end there? Yep.
Is it all good?
Okay.
List item. St. Louis, Missouri. Check box not checked.
All right. As you can see, this is totally unfair. I don't know if you can tell by his accent. He's not from the United States, and he has to do a capital of the states. All right. Give it a shot, James. See if you can figure it out.
List item. List item. Trenton, New Jersey. List item. Wilmington, North Carolina.
So he goes up to his option, and then can go right down to the check answer button and give it a shot. Oh, incorrect. Now I am interrupting Chromevox. This is bad. You can hear that it'll say incorrect and give the answer back. So, James, I'm a very nice teacher. I'm going to give you one more shot at this question. Give it a shot.
List 4 items. Check box not checked. Topeka, Kansas. No response given. List item.
All right.
Check box not checked. Check. Topeka, Kansas.
And now we've highlighted one. You can go right to the checkbox.
Correct answer. Topeka, Kansas.
There we go. And we have a correct answer. But maybe this is a little easy. This is just multiple choice. It's probably the most common use case, but it's not the only one. What if we try to tackle math? So if we go down and try instead to go with the math question, you'll notice that there's a couple challenges. One, it has to read the complicated math LaTeX. And two, it has to be able to understand what James puts in. So we'll start it off, and James can head down to our new stimulus.
Question 2. Heading 5.
Down to
Simplify. $. Question. Simplify. Group. Simplify. Up there. Simplify.
I think there was a few too many at once.
Simplify. Math. X squared over X minus Y over Y squared.
There we go. So now we have an understanding of exactly what it's asking. So now James can easily understand that, go down, and punch in an answer. Anybody know this?
X area.
It's all right. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, James, it's X minus 1 divided by Y.
I think it is. I think it is.
X. 1. Open paren.
So you can see X minus open paren 1 divided by Y.
1. Slash. Division. 1. Close paren.
Well, well, that could be equivalent. Let's go down and check the answer and see what we get.
Check answer. Correct answer.
It is equivalent.
Minus 1. 1 divided by Y.
And we're able to hear what we got back and know that we got it correct. So that is a math question. Obviously, you could see it handled it pretty well. And James, that whole time, was using the keyboard. He never needed the mouse to sort through this stuff. But let's go to the other side. Let's talk about authoring this math question. What happens when you author a math question, what you need to do. So James, let's switch over to this. Perfect. And go to our math formula. So Mark and Gav showed this off a bit, but if we click into the equation, you could see on the top here is our actual equation that we've punched in. But if we go down, we can see an ARIA label with defining what this should read like. Now, as James, why don't we start fresh and make our own equation just to show what that's like. So we're punching in a new equation to do.
Just going to navigate to the Wizzy HTML toolbar and pick Insert Math.
Genius. So now watch as James punches in as an author, he punches in some new formula he wants to test the students on, some simplification. Now look at the bottom of the ARIA label as it automatically is generated X minus Y, open paren, so watch as it X minus Y times 1, and even if he gets more complicated, it doesn't matter, it keeps updating. But the important thing about Learnosity is though we do, though we're always going to create these ARIA generations as best we can, we're always going to leave it open to you to edit as you please. You may know what your students need better than we do. In fact, I'm positive you do. So this is always open and available for authors to edit, which brings us to a really key thing that we want to touch on this talk. I'm sorry. The question was, does changing the ARIA update the equation itself? The workflow we generally see is you punch in the equation itself, then you go to the ARIA and redefine that to be more clear. If you redefine the ARIA, it wouldn't update the equation. Okay, so at this point is where we want to bring up something we really wanted to talk about, which is authoring accessible content. That is to say, there's a flip side of this coin. The one side is Learnosity developing the tools to allow accessibility, and the other is keeping accessibility in mind when you're authoring. Some obvious places that this might exist is transcripts and subtitles and closed captions, and we want to encourage you to add things to the stimulus. You can add audio and video to your stimuluses, but really what we want to make clear here is the fact that we want to be the ones you rely on to develop all your authoring tools so your efforts can be freed up to think of what content do people with impairments need? How can I author a question to make it more clear to someone with a cognitive disability? What tools do I need or how to design your platform to allow authors to do so? So we're going to move on to our next demo, which is taking a look at a question with ARIA, but this time from the authoring perspective. Perfect. Excellent. And the image drag and drop. So we're looking here, and if you look visually, it's very clear very quickly what this is supposed to be. Describe what it feels to stand in this scene. You look at the image, cold, fragrant, not too bad. But this is if, let's say, you have low vision, if it's not clear, this image is clear, you can understand how this question could be very difficult. In fact, James, why don't we take a listen and see what it sounds like?
Question 3. Heading 5. Describe what it feels like to stand in a scene.
All right, let's go down to the image.
Image.
That's not very helpful. James, any ideas how we might be able to improve that a bit?
One way to improve that would be to supply alt text. I'll do that here now. I'll turn the screen reader off and I'll swap back to being the author.
Chrome box is now inactive.
What I can do here is give some much needed context to this image. I'll type it in now. Now it's important when you're adding alt text image to images that you think about how to answer this question as well. Obviously, you don't want to give away too much of the answer, but you do want to provide that context. Let's see what this sounds like to the student with a screen reader.
Image alternative text. Describe what it feels like to stand in a scene.
So as the student moves down to the image,
Daytime nature scene.
they get that context of the image now. In this particular question type, which is an image drag and drop, other context is needed here as well, and it's to do with the response positions. In order to answer this, I'm going to need to know where this is. There's actually nothing on these response positions. These are coming up with nothing in the screen reader.
Draggable item. Cold.
I do hear what the draggable item is,
Daytime nature scene.
and I do know it's a daytime nature scene, but I have no idea what to do with it. So just turn the screen reader off and I'll swap back to being the author.
Chrome box is now inactive.
As the author, I'm going to add ARIA labels to the response positions. I'll do this now. With those two ARIA labels in, let's go through the whole question and hear it play out.
Describe what it feels like to stand in a scene. Daytime nature scene. Snowy mountaintop. Blooming flower meadow. Draggable item. Cold. Draggable item. Fragrant.
So I have the complete context now and I can actually answer the question.
Draggable item. Fragrant. Blooming flower meadow. Draggable item. Cold. Snowy mountaintop. Check answers. Response. Correct. Chrome box is now inactive.
Great. Are we until 2:20? Is that what we're doing?
I think so.
All right. Maybe we should just we have another demo, but we should check it out in our slides, and I do think we would touch on it briefly. But basically, analyzing the images and things in the stimulus that you definitely want to add ARIA context to. In fact, let's very quickly show that tool because I want to just show it off.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, go for it. Just we won't read it off, but here's an example of a question that uses an image in the stimulus. And if James just double click on the question, we can take a look. It's important to fill the alternate text and ARIA labels so that when someone with a visual disability comes to this question, they can easily analyze exactly what it is.
Whether it's a photo, whether it's a chart, provide that context for them.
Perfect. Okay. So when it comes to with Learnosity, we have some partnerships that you can utilize. And what Text Help is one of my favorite examples and is such a powerful tool for students with cognitive disabilities. Things like picture dictionaries, regular dictionaries, highlighting, all these things allow students with cognitive disabilities just make sense of questions that might be difficult for them. But the important thing that I want to show is that we always want to encourage third-party support. Basically, if there's someone you're interested in, some third-party JavaScript library that we can play nice with, we always want to hear, we always want to make it easy for you to expand upon your platform and integrate us with other tools. So let's go over quickly what we saw. Accessible color themes. We saw some font size options, the UI component color contrast, UI component color, screen reader support, third-party integration. We saw demos, a couple different demos from both the perspective of the student and an author, and what the responsibilities are there. So in closing, Learnosity has your back with accessible solutions, but most importantly, accessible tools. Most solutions, except for the third-party ones that I briefly just touched on, are available out of the box. Your first activity can have them. Your efforts, therefore, are freed up to think about what content do people with impairments need? What content can I generate for people with disabilities? But the good news is, if you author with accessibility in mind and utilize Learnosity's tools, you can reach a ton of students, and let's reach as many students as we can. Now, unfortunately, as we said, we don't have time for Q&A, but come up, talk to us about observational testing, simulating disabilities, Learnosity APIs, customization, more third-party support. The best cheeseburger in New York, I know, and Sydney, he knows, cold. So please come talk to us. We'd really like to hear from you guys. Thank you very much.